Hey folks, Robb Wolf here. So, going to be digging into one of the most contentious topics in ketoland, and that's protein and keto, friends or foe. Uh, Instead of waxing eloquent, we'll just kind of jump into this and kind of look at what inspired me to look at this stuff. Uh, we receive comments all the time on the various social media platforms, and one of the comments that we received from a gal, Shelby, she was talking to someone else, another person who's kind of struggling with a ketogenic diet and trying to get things right, macronutrient ratios and what have you. And she said you shouldn't eat over 10% carbs or 20% protein and around 70% fat. When you eat too much protein, it turns into glucose. Protein and carbs are limited on keto. Now, there's some truth to that, but holy smokes, this thing is kind of the gateway for just totally screwing this whole process up. So let me show you a little bit of where this stuff goes. Or let's first unpack a little bit of some of the what I would say the misnomers are around some topics in keto land and just nutrition in general. And the first one, if you want to burn fat, you need to eat fat. There's a lot of people saying that. Uh, yeah, again. And also, I'm going to try to not curse a ton in this because it's a really frustrating topic for me. But the other one, protein kicks you out of ketosis. Now, again, there's threads of truth in some of this, but there's also some really important things that are missed in the bigger picture. What's the perceived problem with protein and keto? So there was this meme going around for a while that protein is effectively chocolate cake, and due to a process called gluconeogenesis, the two are effectively inseparable, and that is just not the case at all. Even a cursory pass through metabolism will show you that. But I have kind of a cool paper. So gluconeogenesis is real, but it's not really a problem. This is a great paper out of the publication Diabetes, May 2013. You can see all the info here. Dietary proteins contribute little to glucose production, even under optimal gluconeogenic conditions in healthy humans. So what they did in this study is they set folks up with a radio-labeled water source and also a radio-labeled nitrogen source. In this case, the nitrogen source happened to be 4 eggs. And what this allows the researchers to do is actually trace the path of both carbon substrates and nitrogen substrates through the metabolic pathways and see where they go. So by doing this, we should be able to see if, in fact, eating a whack of protein, absent carbohydrate, and in a fasted state really ends up contributing significantly to the glucose that we see distributed throughout the body via gluconeogenesis. So if the claim is that gluconeogenesis can kick you out of ketosis, and or which it is true up to a point. When you're providing enough oxaloacetate, then you've got a substrate in which you could burn fat in a more direct fashion versus ketosis. But the big question is, does that even matter? What's the context behind that? For a general fat loss and well-being context, it just doesn't really matter. In my perspective, many other people's perspective, but there are people out there saying that unless you're in this like deep state of ketosis, that you're just not burning fat. And I would argue that that is absolutely not the case. But let's check out this paper. It's really pretty cool. So in this first slide, what we see here, the black arrows or black circles are total amino acids. And this is starting at time 0. Then these folks ate the 4 radio-labeled eggs and they were given the radio-labeled water. And we can track these things over time. So we can see the relative amounts of total amino acids. The open circles are gluconeogenic amino acids, and then the triangles are, do I have that right? Yeah, the triangles are essential amino acids. So the open circles are these gluconeogenic amino acids. So in theory, we should have a good amount of these things kicking around to produce glucose via gluconeogenesis. So what they did is they looked at where all these amino acids went. And so this is tracking the shift of amino acids into the blood plasma over the course of time. And this follows a pretty standard kinetics curve that you would find in any metabolism or biochemistry book. We see where these things are getting sequestered into the plasma. The dark circles are carbon sources. The open circle is dark circles dietary nitrogen, open circles dietary carbon. And then in this slide, we have the cumulative transfer of amino acids into the urine, and it's probably not entirely surprising that over the course of time, we see an uptick in this radio-labeled nitrogen source being dispensed into the urine. These amino acids get oxidized, as we see here. We see deamination processes over the course of time. So there's nothing really surprising here. The amino acids come in, they get digested, or the proteins get digested, broken down into amino acids. The amino acids make their way into circulation. The bulk of these amino acids get associated with plasma proteins. That's largely the way that they're shuffled around the body. And over the course of time, they are deaminated and oxidized and used in metabolic processes. Okay, so check this one out, though. This is really one of the big keys. What about glucose flux? So what the black lines or the black dots indicate is total glucose flux. So this could be glycogenolysis out of the liver, so just the breakdown of stored glycogen out of the liver. It could be a ping of norepinephrine or cortisol or glucagon that is releasing stored glucose out of the liver. So it's all these throughputs. But what's really interesting is down here is the total contribution of glucose from dietary amino acids. It's almost nothing. Like it is, well, it's almost nothing. I'm not really too sure what more to say about that. The claim is that in ingesting dietary protein is going to dramatically elevate the gluconeogenic process and elevate blood glucose levels. But in every damn study that's been done, that is absolutely not the case. So you can beat people over the head with this fact, and it is a fact. And I'm really nervous about using terms like facts. People throw that stuff around pretty willy-nilly, but this is something that is measurable, repeatable. It happens again and again. You throw an apple up in the air, it doesn't continue going up. It falls back to the ground due to gravity. Similar, gluconeogenesis. It exists. It happens. But protein does not contribute to the gluconeogenic process in such a way that we see glucose spiking, which is one of the primary claims that's happening in certain camps out in ketoland. And they use this as an argument for justifying a super low protein intake and a super high fat intake, which has a whole host of problems, which I'm going to try to unpack here in just a little bit. So if we manage to kind of paper over this craziness, I would be, maybe even say the insanity around the gluconeogenic process as it relates to protein and whatnot, then people will say, well, the protein is messing with insulin. Bullshit. It's not. And so this is a graph of plasma insulin in the same kind of gluconeogenic setup. This is part of the same paper. You guys can check this out. And this is really all I've got to say about shifting from the argument of elevating blood glucose. Doesn't happen. And then shifting the discussion to alterations in insulin, which it is not a significant alteration at all. So this is what I've got to say about that. See if I can pull this off. Oh, no, this one's worth getting it right. Okay, next slide. So this is the wrap up of this paper. I know you guys can read it. If so, I think we may put this out in a podcast format also. So I'll go ahead and read these two paragraphs. Our results show that the total postprandial contribution of dietary amino acids to endogenous glucose production, that's what EGP is, was small in humans habituated to a diet medium rich in proteins, even after an overnight fast and in the absence of carbohydrates from the meal. So they stacked the deck. They set these folks up such that they were fasted, which means that and they're not keto adapted. So the body is actively looking for glucose to maintain normal blood glucose levels. Then they fed them a meal of protein, and the response to that was a non-significant increase in blood glucose levels. These findings question the respective roles of dietary proteins and endogenous sources in generating significant amounts of glucose in order to maintain blood glucose levels in healthy subjects. So there is the healthy subjects part there. There may be some caveats around like the type 2 diabetic individual and what have you. But even in diabetics, similar studies have been done, and it largely parallels this whole story. So there is the possibility that there are people who are unique snowflakes out there and their metabolism just produces some really different responses. But you can find this on a easily maintained continuous blood glucose monitor, which many people are doing that. They're checking their blood glucose all the time. They're doing experiments like eating protein for 7 days. And what we see as a response to that is effectively what we see in this study. So there's really nothing crazy going on here. Okay, so what? What does all this stuff matter? So back to Shelby's original question or statement that you shouldn't eat over 10% carbs, 20% protein, and you should eat around 70% fat. This is kind of the breakdown of a traditional therapeutic ketogenic diet, particularly for epilepsy. But what's missed in this story is that these ratios are arrived at after establishing a protein minimum. And if you look in the literature of properly formulated ketogenic diets for specific medical conditions like epilepsy, they do not start at a ratio first and then start doing things. They prescribe protein. There is a carbohydrate limit that is set, and then fats are added for the therapeutic benefit, which is either maintenance or weight loss, depending on how things are done. But all hell can break loose if you start this story from the ratio kind of the percentage perspective, and I'll kind of unpack that. So I said to Shelby, percentages are almost meaningless in meal prep. We need to work with grams first, or folks consistently undereat protein, overeat fat, and calories. Yes, gluconeogenesis is a thing, blah, blah, blah. I've kind of already gone over that. So then Shelby got back to me. She said, speaking of undereating protein, I'm not eating enough grams to maintain muscle mass. And we had some more back and forth. And although she has lost some weight, she stalled, started gaining body fat, but felt like she was losing muscle mass because all of her gym numbers were going backwards and she was just feeling weak and flabby, which is exactly what happens when people undereat protein. So I did something crazy. I asked for more information before making any type of a recommendation to her. And I asked her, how many meals a day are you doing? Are you just full before hitting the protein minimum? Do we need some other options that are more appealing? And what she came back with was really interesting. So she went and redid her macros using the Ketogains macronutrient calculator, which is what I recommend, which is what we use for the Keto Masterclass. And check this out. So when she ran her numbers again, the Ketogains macronutrient calculator recommended 100 grams of protein a day. When she was building her intervention around percentages, she was eating 40 grams of protein a day. The worldwide global average for protein, and this is for people living in third world conditions, mainly eating beans and rice, is 75 grams of protein a day. So she was just ridiculously under eating protein. And this is where it's hard for me. Nikki said, don't curse in this thing. Don't curse in this thing. But I may do a separate one, rated R for Robb, and just curse like a sailor because I am so frustrated by this, because this problem pops up again and again. I can't tell you what massive percentage of the problems that we address are folks tackling things like this. So she's eating 40 grams of protein, going off of the recommendations to build this from percentages first. Check this out. I kind of lost my shiz when I checked this out. You guys have possibly heard of the 30 bananas a day diet. Durian Ryder, the crazy vegan guy, recommends this, claims that this is the way he eats. If you check this out, one average size banana has 1.3 grams of protein. 1.3 grams of protein. If you followed the 30 bananas a day level of eating, you would get 39 grams of protein. The 30 bananas a day dietary recommendations are as bad as the low protein recommendations that are coming out of a remarkable amount of the ketogenic space when people are building things from a percentage standpoint instead of addressing the basic biological needs of how much protein people function best with to maintain muscle mass and maintain immune function and to set themselves up so that they have a normal neuroregulation of appetite. Protein is the most satiating nutrient, and there's some really important reasons why for that. But I just think about this. This gal is following a ketogenic diet, and it is legitimately a ketogenic diet, but it is so low in protein that following the 30 bananas a day diet was on par, literally 1 gram difference between that and the recommendations that she had coming from other folks that build this from percentages first instead of thinking about protein addressing lean muscle mass needs. Okay, so what part two? I'm starving at 20% protein is what Shelby said. And it is absolutely not surprising at all because, again, protein is the most satiating macronutrient. And in fact, in a slide or two here, I'm going to explain why when we look at the protein leverage hypothesis. But my comment to her, this is where starting with a ratio is a disaster. Most of the time, we need to set protein grams first, then add in our 20 to 30 grams of carbs, and then add fat to round out the calories to provide for either maintenance or a mild caloric deficit to lean out. Not surprised at all that you're starving at 40 grams a day of protein. This is way too low. And it is. And it's amazing that Shelby even stuck with this stuff because she was probably ready to eat her own arm off. And again, to kind of backtrack on this, Shelby lost weight. She was making some progress. And then she hit a plateau in which she started losing muscle mass, started gaining body fat. Now, why did she gain body fat? Well, check this out. There's this thing called the protein leverage hypothesis. There's some great papers around this. Just do some doctor Googling around protein leverage hypothesis. But the point here is that meals or eating strategies that are low in protein, we inevitably eat more fat and carbs to round things out. The protein leverage hypothesis suggests that low protein foods may lead to overconsumption of carbohydrate or fat for energy. So now why is that? Well, if we get in and look at nutrient deficiencies and nutrient density, protein foods are the most nutrient dense foods. And this is true whether we're talking about animal products to feed humans or cats, or whether we're talking about vegetable matter to feed cattle and sheep. This protein leverage hypothesis and this tendency to eat to a protein minimum is conserved across virtually all vertebrates, all organisms. This is it's a universal in biology. Now, it's still kind of in this theory process where they're still vetting it out, but it is as theories go, it is the best descriptor that we have for explaining why organisms eat the way that they do. And when organisms are able to eat nutrient-dense, comparatively high-protein food sources, they tend to eat less because they need less. These nutrient-dense foods tend to also be high in protein, and there's just kind of a synergy there. And so this is some work that Ted Naiman has put together. He's just been amazing in fleshing out some really phenomenal kind of infographics talking about high nutrient density, low energy density foods versus low nutrient density, high energy density foods, which in ketoland, what this turns into is folks not eating much in the way of protein and consuming huge amounts of fat, and they are still hungry. Now, fat does have a satiating effect. Being in the state of ketosis does have a satiating effect. Starvation ketosis has a remarkable satiating effect. People are not typically all that hungry, but if you want to end up super low in muscle mass and stringy and skinny, you could eat a vegan diet or you could do a super low protein ketogenic diet, as people are recommending here. As you noticed, one of the more extreme versions of a vegan diet, this 30 bananas a day diet, basically supplied the same protein levels as what was coming out of the percentage-based recommendations. So where does all this confusion come from? This chart around optimal ketosis levels, it's been helpful, but it's also been kind of a damnation kind of run as well. When you give people a target to shoot for, then that's what they gun for. And there's just kind of a reality that for fat loss in particular, the ketone levels just don't really matter that much, if at all. And we can dig into this more if you guys have questions specifically on the hows, whys, what's it's, and what have you. There we can dig into that. The reality is that if we eat adequate levels of protein, then we are satiated, we're not hungry, we have stable energy levels, and then we tend to spontaneously reduce caloric intake because we don't need that many calories because we're hitting both our macro and micronutrient needs. I use myself as an example. I actually have dropped my carb levels for the last 3 months, and I've kind of figured out how to make this stuff work for jiu-jitsu. My big failing was inadequate electrolytes, so I'll do kind of an update around that. But I never see my blood ketone levels get above about 0.4. Every once in a while, I'll hit a 0.6. The last time I hit a 0.6 was when I had food poisoning and I didn't eat a thing for 2 days and I was at a 0.6. And if you see in the picture, I'm pretty lean, I'm pretty muscular, I have good performance. I am not suffering problems from a lack of what would be considered therapeutic or optimum ketone levels. I don't know how I could get my ketone levels to that therapeutic range other than doing one of the following. I could probably fast for 10 days, which I really at this point don't know what the upside for that would be for me. Maybe there's some sort of long-term health benefit, possibly, but I would absolutely lose a significant amount of muscle mass. There's some claims out there that fasting is highly anabolic. I will argue that that is being taken incredibly out of context. And again, if that's a topic that you folks want me to dig into, we could really unpack what fasting is and what it is not. But where I'm eating right now, these are the levels that I get. But I could starve myself for an extended period of time and my ketones would go up. Or I could eat massive amounts of fat, particularly MCT-rich fat, and I would not be as lean. I wouldn't feel as good. My systemic inflammatory markers would go up because I'm overeating food and I'm starting to get that kind of insulin resistant, lipid related problem of just simply overeating. So do I fast? Do I overeat fat just so I can get my ketone levels to some sort of like therapeutic level? Or do I focus on performance? And, I can eyeball the ketones once in a while and look at it as an interesting side note, but chasing ketones is really a problem for folks. Now, I'm just going to talk about MTOR briefly here, mainly as I've interacted with people online, and we're unpacking this whole protein topic. What folks will do is say, well, you're eating high protein, so MTOR is going to kill you. And that's the end of the discussion. And this is so intellectually dishonest and unrigorous. This is one of the spots that I thought I was going to curse like crazy and currently maintaining, but I'm going to do a whole huge piece on MTOR. I'm not sure if it's going to be a blog. I'm not sure if it's going to be kind of a presentation like this, but this MTOR topic is being used as a means of just shutting down discussion. Oh, MTOR is going to elevate, so you're doing it wrong. That's bullshit. And that is, again, intellectually dishonest, and it's not moving any of this stuff forward. So the folks who were going to bring up MTOR on this topic, just hold it. And I'm going to address this stuff in a pretty thorough fashion. And you can still not believe that and continue eating low protein and getting suboptimal results. But for the folks that are willing to listen and take all this stuff in, you'll have some good information around that. So all this stuff boils down to context. What did high fat and low carb, high fat mean? And it means don't worry about the skin on the chicken, but don't avoid protein foods and don't make meals out of pure fat because they are not satiating. They are not nutrient dense. And that's just kind of a reality. And again, there may be situations where people will benefit from that. Therapeutic ketosis for neurodegenerative disease, for cancer treatment, for epilepsy, different story, completely different story. And again, just to remind folks, I sit on the board of directors of a clinic that uses ketogenic diets for everything from weight loss to traumatic brain injury. So I'm not pulling this stuff out of my ass. I'm not saying that I know everything about all of this stuff, but I'm fairly well steeped in the context here. The other context in this, again, is the Ted Naiman stuff, low carb, high fat pro tip. If your body is already high fat, then all you need is low carb. You don't need to necessarily worry about higher fat protein sources, but at the same time, you don't need to add a stick of butter to every single steak you're eating, not if you want to get some results. So I got this idea here that I'd like to share with you. There's a promise, and the promise is that there is a dietary approach that will work for you. Maybe it's 30 bananas a day. I don't know. Wouldn't really work so well for me, but there's something out there that's going to work for you. I guarantee you. If what you're doing right now isn't working, and by working, I mean producing the results that you want, there is something that you can find that will work. Like I just said, if you're not getting the results you want, then change course. That's my greasy used car salesman pitch. If you're eating a low protein, high fat ketogenic diet and it's working great for you, fantastic. That's awesome. But if you poke around the interwebs and you look at how many people are struggling on this topic, the main recommendation is to cut protein. And I would argue that is driving the boat in the wrong direction for the vast majority of people. And my greasy used car salesman pitch again is try the higher protein approach. Use that Ketogains macronutrient calculator to set up your benchmarks, follow that for 30 days, see how you look, feel, and perform, and then compare that to what you were doing before. It's pretty transparent. And again, to this point, an effective process should be measurable, predictable, and repeatable. Period. It shouldn't be an opinion piece. This is more like an engineering project building a bridge that it is some sort of like mystical chakra balancing. Like the human metabolism does vary from person to person, but there's a lot more similarity than there is difference in this stuff. So as an additional aside, there's also this almost poisonous idea out in the interwebs that all this information is available for free. Why would you bother paying for it? That's fine. That's a fine perspective to have. I put ketogenic diet into a Google search term and I got over 1 million results back in 0.53 seconds. I put it into a YouTube search. I got almost 500,000 search returns. So there's a ton of information out there, without a doubt, and it's amazing. But people are not struggling with information. They're struggling with the wisdom of how to actually apply this stuff. And it's just kind of, again, it's a weird deal where people have this almost kind of weird entitlement kind of thing going on where because there's free information that somehow somebody charging for something that's somehow untoward or problematic. And, yeah, it's totally self-serving. I've got shit to sell. I'm selling you the Keto Masterclass. I would recommend that you check out the Ketogains Bootcamp. But, you've got kind of one of two options that you can go with this type of thing. You can jump into search engines and look at videos and try to cobble all this stuff together. And if you figure it out, that's fantastic. But there's a remarkable number of people that struggle with this stuff, and having a system like going through the Ketogains Bootcamp or partaking in the Keto Masterclass, you've got a soup to nuts program that offers you a triage process for figuring out where you are, where you want to go, and helps you to systems check and to figure out what's going wrong if something is in fact going wrong. Like, again, theoretically, I'm an expert on this stuff, and I just wasn't getting in enough electrolytes to support my physical activity doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So Tyler and Luis, the founders of Ketogains, they really leaned on me. They're like, dude, weigh and measure your electrolytes. And so I did, and lo and behold, problem was solved. So anyway, make it up on your own, get a system, whatever. But if you want to save a lot of time, effort, and struggling, then I would recommend trying to go with the systems process. So what can a system provide? This is one of the testimonials we received. Guys, I wanted to share it's been a success. I'm down 15 pounds, 20 inches, and more importantly, now doing spin classes for 45 minutes and to an hour each day. Wasn't active before. The material has been so helpful. I learned that I needed to hit my protein goals for success. Prior to that, I thought that it was the fat macro that I needed to hit. Again, we have just tons of these testimonials where people have been focusing on fat and they get a modicum of success, but when they start steering the boat towards making sure that they get adequate protein, and it's funny, there's this perception that like the Ketogains recommendations are like super high protein. They're not. They're very reasonable and they're all evidence-based and supported, and they end up getting really consistent results. So this is what a system can provide for you. If you want to learn more, go to robbwolf.com/keto masterclass. Again, I'm going to do a pretty thorough unpacking of the MTOR topic. I'm also looking at some general guidelines around kind of health and longevity. I think that some people are just going crazy over the top on the detail with that, and they're missing the forest for the trees. If you guys want me to do a piece on fasting and what my thoughts are on therapeutic fasting, intermittent fasting, and whatnot, let me know. Throw that in the comments either here or on social media. I'm here to help you. I love doing this stuff. I do get frustrated sometimes. I mean, I guess if everybody was doing this right, then I wouldn't have the opportunity to comparatively stand out and shine by having a methodology that actually works better. But again, this is the challenge that I would throw out to you. If you are not getting the type of results that you want, try something different. I would recommend using that Ketogains macronutrient calculator to establish your baseline of protein, keep your carbs at the recommended upper limit or a bit below, and then set fat as a lever to either hit maintenance or fat loss. So again, thank you guys. Let me know what you think. Definitely fire off your questions and we can tackle that in future video pieces or Q&A on the blog or on the podcast with Nikki.